This episode of Moving Panels is brought to you by the following fake sponsor. Hey, a bunch of us are going to Vite's Visionary Sushi after work. Do you want to go?
What's Vite's Visionary Sushi?
It's this incredible new sushi place, inspired by the sophistication and elegance of Ozymandias. They serve the most exquisite sushi and seafood dishes. Today we're all going to share the Ozymandias roll.
Ooh, what's in it?
It's a colossal seared sushi roll filled with succulent squid, crab, tuna, salmon, avocado, cucumber, and almonds, topped with a spicy teriyaki tobiko crunch and drizzled with an edamame bean juice for a burst of flavor.
That sounds amazing.
We're also having crepe cakes, each layer as intricate and complex as the next.
Perfect. Where is Vite's Visionary Sushi?
At the corner of Moore and Gibbons, near the new Frontiersman building. Welcome to this Movie Panels One Shot. Let's have a nerdy little conversation, and today we are continuing our March Madness as we go through Watchmen, and we're going to talk about the comic within the comic, and that is Tales of the Black Freighter. Now, for those of you who aren't aware, that when the movie was released, they actually did release an animated version of Tales of the Black Freighter, which then if you see the Ultimate Cut, they put it into the Ultimate Cut the same way that Alan Moore and Dave Gibbons put it into the comic. So we're going to talk about that for those of you that aren't familiar with it, and those of you that are familiar with it. We're going to kind of talk about its purpose. So with me for this, I've got Nicholas Pepin from Pop Culture Roulette and Chad Smith. Welcome, gentlemen.
How you doing?
All right, so let's just go ahead and ask the question that needs to be asked. Why does Tales from the Black Freighter exist in the comic?
That is a question I've been asking since I read the book for the first time.
Because Alan Moore is not okay with just giving you one piece of art to make a point. He has to incept art into his art to double down on that point.
Yeah, I do like though the notion behind it is, if we're in a world where superheroes exist, what would that mean about comic books? And so instead of there being superhero comic books, it is, as this one is, it's pirates comic books. And I would assume there's probably horror comics, but we just see this Tales of the Black Freighter, which is a pirate comic. Yeah, because, I mean, Marvel and DC and their universes always make it where the comic books still exist. They're just telling the stories of the real superheroes of that universe. This was supposed to be a deconstructing of a superhero story, and so making it let's not have superhero comic books, let's have pirate comic books. So I get that. The story that we get is a story from, like I said, the comic is called Tales of the Black Freighter, but the specific story that is given in the comic is called Marooned. And for those of you not familiar, let me run down the synopsis really quick. We have a mariner that has been stranded on an island after his ship was attacked by the Black Freighter. He is the only man to survive, and all of his crewmates are dead. He then builds a raft and uses their bloated bodies to help keep his raft afloat. As he's in the sea trying to get rescued on his raft, he goes to eating seagulls that he can catch, and he even eats parts of the bodies of his crewmates. He does begin to go crazy from all of that, and when he makes it home, he discovers that his home has been taken over by the pirates of the Black Freighter. He then proceeds to kill the first people that he encounters, and then ultimately ends up beating his wife to death, thinking that she is one of the pirates. And once he realizes what he has done, he flees back to the sea, where we see him board the Black Freighter at the very end. And that is a very quick, brief synopsis, full story of what we get from that. So just face value, what are your thoughts on this story that Alan Moore and Dave Gibbons tells?
So I kind of buried the lead in what I said to start off with. Like, this is Alan Moore, again, giving you his take on human morality. I feel like the point of Watchmen, as well as the point of Tales of the Black Freighter, is that I'm not sure Alan Moore thinks that humans are capable of good. I think that he thinks that even when we try to do good,
Oh,
it
100%.
becomes evil, which is very much Tales of the Black Freighter, lesser so Watchmen. So it really kind of is a weird Russian doll situation where he's built, here's what I really think about people as you get deeper and deeper into his work. But I do appreciate that you said that this is a quick synopsis, because Alan Moore got so obsessed with this, he writes like a fake history to the Tales of the Black Freighter, where it's got its own comic history that he includes in the graphic novel even. So, if you're not really paying attention, you could think this is a genuine 1951 comic book kind of deal, but it's super bizarre how kind of into his own head you see Alan Moore get through this, in my opinion.
So, Nicholas, you don't sound like you're a fan. So what was your thoughts of just the...
No, I wasn't. Rereading the book for this, it took me out the first time, and it was knowing it was there, so I was prepared for it. It's still even with the fake history and understanding it is Alan Moore trying to get even deeper and an Ouroboros of a snake eating itself kind of thing. I don't know. I mean, I felt like it was you don't need to keep making the same point. We got it. You getting it with this one. I like I said in the other episode, it's I feel like it was a smart move on Zack Snyder's part to not include it in the director's cut. I mean, I know I got put
I was
back
about to say,
in
I don't know if
the,
that was Zack Snyder's
Ultimate
decision,
Cut,
but because it is in the Ultimate Cut.
yeah. I mean, I watched it. I watched the animated version. I mean, it's a decent little story. I mean, it's every bit as unrealistic. I mean, making a raft out of humans is quite possibly the worst idea of and non-functional. It just wouldn't work. But yeah, I don't know. I'm not a fan. It is. I mean, maybe if it was its own separate thing, I would have been a fan of it. But I felt like it was shoehorned in and not necessary.
So to throw this kind of, because I'm going to go a little deeper, but to throw in kind of this face value, did you see it as you're reading the comic? Did you think of it as a break within the story? Maybe a way to just almost like a commercial break, to just take you away from the story for a little bit so your brain could either process or settle on what you're reading from Watchmen, and you're reading this other comic for a little bit? Did you see it in that light, maybe?
No, well, I mean, if you're talking about that as a negative thing, maybe. It's. I mean, it was a break, but it wasn't necessarily a welcome break.
Okay.
It wasn't like okay, I get a chance to sit back and think about what I just read. It was kind of now I've got to focus on this other thing. How does it relate to what I'm? And it just I don't know. Maybe my special needs brain doesn't focus well on two different stories at the same time.
I will say I did like in the comic how the narration of the Mariner, it bleeds through to what is actually happening in the comic. I think that is genius.
I love how he uses the font and I don't know what you call it, but the bubble that surrounds the text is different, and they'll be in the same panel.
That's what
how one leads into the other. It is very cool. I think it was more emotionally ratcheting up the threat of war. He's even a child sitting here reading a comic book, and you see the little interactions he gets with Bernie, the newsman, who's clearly being affected by the news that he sells. And so you see that kind of bleed over and have this weird little horror story going on the
kind
side.
Of mirroring what's happening. Yeah.
Yeah, absolutely. So I think in a weird way, while I don't disagree with you, it is jarring, but I think it was intended to be that way. And I think it ratchets up the emotional stakes toward that get you to the end of the book. So I really wish I had been into comics or could have understood it at 6, 7 years old to read those. I would have liked to have digested it as 12 like episodic pieces to see how it interacted differently, but obviously I can't go back in time. So
Yeah, maybe if I had read it, because I've only ever read it in the omnibus,
Graphic
the graphic novel. I never bothered to hunt down the 12. I can't imagine what the price of
the 12 individual.
each individual 12 issue,
Yeah.
especially first run stuff, would be. But so maybe I would have thought of it differently had I been reading it like monthly instead of just once in an afternoon.
yeah,
Because
yeah,
I
for
will
sure.
point out, this isn't the only way that Moore kind of breaks up the story, because he also has the excerpts from Under the Hood,
Hollis Mason's book. So
book. He has the files on Rorschach that he throws in there. So there are other ways he breaks up the story and gives you, like you're saying, gives you this other background information, this other ancillary information that helps to build the universe. But of course, this one doesn't help. Well, it does in the way you're saying it helps build the universe, but it is this separate story as it appears. So, which brings me to my next topic. Do you think that? What do you think? Not do you think? Because I think it's agreed upon. But what do you think about the fact that, in essence, the Tales of the Black Freighter is Ozymandias's story?
Yeah, I don't know. I lean on the clever side. I like weird little asides that, because we talked about how Alan Moore was shocked that people identified with Rorschach and they weren't supposed to. So on one hand, you go, do we really need to beat this point to death? Maybe we do. Maybe people got the wrong point to begin with. So I don't know. But I tend to like those kind of things. I like a world with a lot of depth and different things given. Is that Ozymandias's ultimate story though? Like, does he? So I don't think he sees himself as that. But
okay, so here's where I've got the connection. So just like the Mariner, Ozymandias believes that he's the only person who can, quote unquote, save the world. The Mariner thinks he's the only one who can stop the Black Freighter from, destroying his town and taking over his town. Yeah. They both kind of descend into madness because of this thought. They use their, again, I'm going to use a lot of quotes here, or, quotations. They use their, quote unquote, friends as a way to salvation.
As a life raft, perhaps?
Yes. And he sees the nuclear Armageddon as the big evil and does horrible things to stop it, only to ultimately be the big evil himself. The Black Freighter in the comic is actually described as having black sails against the yellow Indies sky, which resembles the sign of a fallout shelter, which in essence you can kind of think of that's what Ozymandias's fortress in Antarctica essentially is. But the biggest one is at near the end of the comic. Ozymandias actually says that he is troubled by dreams lately of swimming towards, and then he stops. And he says, no, it doesn't matter. It's not important. And to me, that's the big connection.
Yeah, I think that the interesting part is the comic book takes you to the Mariner's realization of what he's done. Whereas I don't think Ozymandias has that realization. I think that he still thinks, he's still trying to create himself as the new Ramses. Like, he talks about that he's going to be the leader of the unified world. Whereas the Mariner, he's, nope, I'm evil. What I've done is wrong. And the Black Freighter won.
And I think that's in that quote, the fact that he starts to say it, I'm troubled by dreams lately of swimming towards, no, it doesn't matter. It's not important. Like I really think that's the purpose of that line, is that I am headed towards my ultimate, consequence of facing my demons, as the Mariner does in the book. But Ozymandias goes, nah, I'm not there yet.
I'm good.
Yeah. I also like that in the comic, we find out that Mark Shea, who is the fictional creator of this Tales of the Black Freighter, is actually one of the people working with Ozymandias to design the squid.
Right.
Yeah.
It's
So-
that whole thing about how he wrote like a backstory to the comic is just wild to me. But anyways,
The man does know detail, and he does do his research.
yep.
So finally, let's talk about the ending. So, the ending of the Black Freighter, was his town actually taken over by these pirates, or are the pirates and the Black Freighter a metaphor?
I mean, I feel like I don't know ultimately if the Black Freighter exists, but they definitely didn't take over the town. It was just all in his head that it had happened, and he had driven himself completely mad, or had been driven mad. I mean, there's clearly a metaphor that Alan Moore was writing, and now that you have pointed out the Ozymandias thing, it does change kind of my whole perception on the story. But at the same time, like, I just, I don't ultimately know where it was going,
I think in a very, I mean, it's supposed to replicate a comic book from the 50s. And so I think he's kind of just looking back at the stuff he read when he was a kid where there isn't an answer, where like you just kind of have to figure it out on your own sort of thing. So he left it very open-ended. I think the Mariner's last lines where he's talking about the crew of the Black Freighter are seizing the only prize that they wanted, which is him,
Yeah.
So is he still just mad, and he is leaning into that he's giving himself over to evil? Like, is it a metaphor for Satan? Like Satan has won and has got his soul kind of thing?
Yeah,
I don't know.
That's how I look at it. I kind of look at it as him throwing himself back into the ocean. He's essentially going back into the ocean to die.
Yeah.
And boarding the Black Freighter and have him, become part of the Black Freighter. I kind of looked at it as that's his afterlife.
His descent into hell, yeah.
Yeah, that's him, his soul being claimed. But yeah, so bringing that back to the Ozymandias connection and going back to the comic, do you think Ozymandias was correct about the nuclear war? Because that's a question throughout. Like, would it actually happen? And then he does what he does before it could happen. So, do you think he was correct, or do you think he was just insane?
I think for that comic world, he's correct. It very much seems to me, they even use all of these news reports that are happening real time, that are very much talking about how, everybody's stepped back from the brink kind of thing. So more clearly was, at least in the 80s, he was very much into politics and understood the political landscape that he's dissecting. And so he does a very good job of satirically taking Reagan and the Soviet Union to its utmost extent, with like the expansion of the Afghanistan war into Pakistan and all this kind of stuff. So I think you can make the argument that in the book, at least, Veidt is a lesser of two evils. So he's kind of right in even in his own justification.
Yeah.
So he more makes you wrestle with that, I feel like.
Yeah, I mean, no, I can't argue with any of that. I mean, it is. I mean, is he? I mean, it's that the old philosophical argument of the train.
Yeah.
You've got the two tracks. You got one person, or you've got three people, and where's and so is killing a couple million to save a billion worth it, or do you just let the natural progression of everything happen and everybody dies? It just, I don't know. I mean, then you get into free will, versus predestination, and
Which
and,
is a
there's
whole discussion about Dr. Manhattan.
Yeah,
in my opinion.
That's
Yeah.
what I was about to say.
So there's a lot to unpack there that is a whole another conversation for a different, I think, episode. But
Yeah, there's a lot about Watchmen that even with us doing these 4 episodes across the month of March, like we still can't get into all the philosophical
crannies.
and
Yeah.
all of the depth that Alan Moore definitely put into it. Yeah, that would have to be conversations for another day. But we'll go ahead and wrap this one up since this one was just going to focus on Tales of the Black Freighter. Next week, Tim and I will talk about the 2019 Watchmen HBO limited series, and we'll talk about how that all ties in and whether or not it was it did the story justice as it tried to continue it. That'll be our discussion for next week, but we'll go ahead and wrap things up today. Thank you, Nicholas. Thank you, Chad, for this Tales of the Black Freighter discussion. All right, thanks everybody for listening. Rate and review the show. For today, for Moving Panels, I'm Laramy Wells, and I'll see you on the other side of the page.